Jackie Chan sat in a small noodle shop in Hong Kong in 1976, counting his money. He had enough for the noodles he'd just eaten and maybe one more meal tomorrow. He was 22 years old, had been working in the film industry for over a decade, and had just starred in his sixth or seventh lead role in a martial arts film that had bombed at the box office. Again, the pattern was becoming sickeningly familiar. A studio would give him a chance. He'd pour everything into the performance. The film would be released to terrible reviews in empty theaters, and he'd be back to taking whatever stunt work he could find just to pay rent and eat. His friends from the China Drama Academy, his opera school brothers who'd trained alongside him under Master Yu Jim-Yuen, were in similar situations, scraping by, wondering if the brutal decade of training they'd endured as children had been for nothing. Some had already given up on film work entirely, finding regular jobs as stuntmen for live performances or leaving the industry altogether. Jackie was starting to think maybe they had the right idea. Maybe he just wasn't meant to be a star. Maybe all the broken bones and failed auditions and terrible reviews were the universe telling him to accept his place as a permanent supporting player, a stuntman who'd occasionally get small roles, but would never be more than that. He finished his noodles, paid, and walked back to the tiny apartment he shared with 3 other people, trying to figure out what he'd done wrong and whether he had the strength to keep trying. To understand how desperate Jackie's situation was in the mid-1970s, you need to go back further, to his childhood and the poverty that shaped him long before he ever appeared on screen. Jackie was born Chan Kong-sang in 1954 in Hong Kong to parents who worked as servants at the French embassy. His father was a cook, his mother a housekeeper, and they lived in the servants' quarters, small, cramped rooms provided by the embassy as part of their employment. The family had almost no money beyond what was needed for basic survival. Jackie's parents had fled mainland China after the Communist Revolution, his father having worked for the nationalist government and living under a false identity to avoid persecution. They arrived in Hong Kong with nothing and built a life through hard labor and extreme frugality. Jackie's earliest memories were of scarcity, not starvation. His parents made sure he had food, but the constant awareness that money was scarce, that every purchase required calculation, that luxuries were impossible and even basic necessities required careful management. He wore hand-me-down clothes, played with makeshift toys, understood from very young that his family existed at the margins of Hong Kong's economy, that they were among the city's working poor who kept the infrastructure running, but never benefited much from the prosperity their labor created. When Jackie was 6 years old, his parents made a decision that would define his entire childhood. They enrolled him at the China Drama Academy, a Peking opera school run by Master Yu Jim-Yuen. The school offered a 10-year program where students lived on site, receiving training in acrobatics, martial arts, singing, and acting. The training was notoriously brutal. Students practiced from before dawn until late at night. Mistakes were punished with physical strikes. The discipline was more military than educational. But for poor families, the academy offered something invaluable. It took care of children completely. Students received food, shelter, clothing, and education in exchange for their parents signing contracts committing them to the full decade of training. Jackie's parents didn't send him to the opera school because they thought he'd become a star or because they valued Peking opera as an art form. They sent him there because they couldn't afford to keep him. His father was being offered a job in Australia as head cook at the American Embassy in Canberra. Better pay, more stability, a chance at a better life. But they couldn't afford to take Jackie with them, couldn't pay for his passage or support him in Australia while working full-time jobs. So they signed the contract, paid the enrollment fee, likely borrowing money to do so, and left 6-year-old Jackie at the academy while they moved to another country. The 10 years Jackie spent at the China Drama Academy, from ages 6 to 16, were physically brutal and emotionally isolating. Master Yu was a harsh taskmaster who believed discipline came through pain and that students needed to be pushed beyond what they thought were their limits. Training sessions were grueling. Students learned to do backflips, handstands, splits, complex acrobatic sequences. They practiced martial arts forms for hours until every movement was precise. They learned to fall safely, to take hits without injury, to control their bodies with perfect precision. Mistakes earned you strikes from a bamboo cane. Complaining earned you more training. Showing weakness earned you contempt. Jackie was one of the youngest students and smaller than many of the others. He got beaten up by older students, struggled with some of the more demanding physical requirements, often felt overwhelmed by the relentless pressure. But he also developed extraordinary physical abilities. By the time he was 10 or 11, he could do acrobatic feats that most adults couldn't imagine. Backflips from standing positions, handstands on one finger, splits so deep his legs were nearly flat against the ground. He developed pain tolerance that allowed him to keep training through injuries that would have stopped normal children. And he'd learned that persistence mattered more than talent, that being willing to try one more time after failing was more valuable than being naturally gifted. But the academy provided no real education beyond performance skills. Jackie learned minimal reading and writing, almost no mathematics, nothing about history or science or literature. When he finally left the academy at age 16 in 1970, he was extraordinarily skilled in a very narrow domain, but unprepared for almost everything else in life. He could do backflips but couldn't read a newspaper well. He could perform complex martial arts sequences, but had no understanding of how money or business worked. He'd been trained as a performer for an art form, Peking opera, that was already dying, that had almost no audience among young people in 1970s Hong Kong. His parents were still in Australia and couldn't support him financially. He had nowhere to live, no money, no prospects beyond his physical abilities. So Jackie did what many opera school graduates did. He started working in the Hong Kong film industry as a stuntman. The work was dangerous and poorly paid, but it required exactly the skills he'd spent 10 years developing: the ability to fall, fight, and take hits without getting seriously injured. Jackie's first years in the film industry, from roughly 1970 to 1976, were a grinding struggle for survival. He worked as an extra and stuntman on dozens of films, usually uncredited, earning minimal pay. A typical day's work might pay enough for a few meals and contribution to shared rent in a cramped apartment with other stuntmen. There was no job security, no benefits, no safety net. If you got injured and couldn't work, you simply didn't earn money until you healed. If work was slow and no productions were hiring stuntmen, you went hungry or borrowed money you'd struggle to repay. Jackie took every job offered, no matter how dangerous or degrading. If a scene required someone to be thrown through a window, Jackie volunteered. If a fight sequence needed someone to take a hard fall onto concrete, Jackie did it. If a stunt seemed too risky for other stuntmen, Jackie was willing to try it because saying no meant not getting hired again. He broke bones, suffered concussions, accumulated injuries, and kept working because stopping meant starvation. This wasn't courage or dedication to craft, it was economic desperation. During this period, Jackie lived in poverty that was in some ways worse than his childhood, because now he had to manage it himself, rather than having the opera school provide basic needs. He shared tiny apartments with multiple roommates, slept on floors or makeshift beds, ate the cheapest food available, wore the same clothes until they fell apart. He had no savings, no security, no clear path forward. Every week was about making enough money to survive until the next week. The work was also psychologically demoralizing. Stuntmen were treated as expendable bodies, tools for creating action sequences, rather than skilled performers deserving respect. Directors rarely bothered learning stuntmen's names. If you got hurt, you were replaced immediately. The knowledge that you could be permanently injured or killed for a job that paid barely enough to eat was constantly present. Jackie saw other stuntmen get seriously hurt, broken backs, shattered limbs, concussions that left lasting damage. He understood that he was one bad fall away from being unable to work, from being discarded by an industry that had no use for injured stuntmen. During this period, Jackie did work on some films that became significant. He was a stuntman on Bruce Lee films like Fist of Fury and Enter the Dragon, but this didn't improve his situation meaningfully. Being an uncredited stuntman on a successful film paid the same as being an uncredited stuntman on a failure. The work was still dangerous, still poorly compensated, still offered no path to better opportunities. Jackie's first real chances at leading roles came after Bruce Lee's death in 1973. Hong Kong studios were desperately trying to find the next Bruce Lee, And Jackie was one of many young martial artists given opportunities in films that tried to replicate Bruce's success. Between 1973 and 1976, Jackie appeared in several films with titles like New Fist of Fury, designed to explicitly invoke Bruce Lee's legacy. Jackie was expected to be serious, intense, intimidating, to project the same kind of controlled violence that had made Bruce a star. Every single one of these films failed. Some failed catastrophically, barely recovering their production costs. Critics dismissed Jackie as a Bruce Lee knockoff without Bruce's charisma or presence. Audiences stayed away, uninterested in pale imitations of someone they could still watch in Bruce's original films. Jackie would see himself on screen in these films and cringe. He looked uncomfortable, unconvincing, like he was trying to be someone he fundamentally wasn't. Each failure made it harder to get the next opportunity. Studios lost money on Jackie Chan films and were understandably reluctant to try again. Jackie's reputation became toxic. He was the guy who'd been given multiple chances and bombed every time. Directors who might have considered him for roles heard about his track record and cast someone else. The brief window where Jackie had access to lead roles was closing rapidly, and he knew it. The emotional toll of repeated public failure was devastating. Jackie wasn't failing privately. His failures were on movie screens, reviewed in newspapers, discussed by audiences who found his performances lacking. Every failed film was proof that he wasn't good enough, wasn't talented enough, didn't have what it took to succeed. And because these were lead roles in martial arts films, exactly the thing he'd been trained for, the failures felt like condemnation of his entire identity and skill set. Jackie has described this period as the lowest point of his life. He was in his early 20s, had no money, no prospects, no clear path forward. His parents were in Australia and couldn't help him. His opera school brothers were struggling similarly. The entertainment industry had essentially decided he was a failure, who'd been given chances he didn't deserve and had wasted them. He was back to doing stunt work when he could get it, living hand to mouth, wondering what would happen when his body inevitably failed, and he could no longer take the falls and hits that stunt work required. There were moments during this period when Jackie considered quitting entirely. Not just quitting attempts at stardom, but leaving the film industry altogether, finding some other way to survive. He had no education beyond opera school training, but surely there were other jobs. Manual labor, service work, something that would provide stable income even if it was meager. The uncertainty and repeated rejection of film work was exhausting, and the poverty was grinding. Maybe it would be better to accept a smaller, more stable life, rather than keep chasing a dream that seemed to move further away each time he reached for it. What kept Jackie trying, paradoxically, was that he had no real alternative. He had one marketable skill set: physical performance, the ability to move his body in ways most people couldn't. That skill had value in the film industry, but nowhere else. If he left film work, he'd be starting completely over in a different field with no qualifications, no connections, no advantages. And he'd be giving up the tiny possibility that somehow, against all evidence, he might eventually succeed. There was also pride involved, though Jackie might not have articulated it this way at the time. He'd survived 10 years at the China Drama Academy through determination and persistence. He'd endured Master Yu's harsh discipline, had kept training when other students quit, had developed extraordinary abilities through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. That same stubbornness made it psychologically difficult to quit film work, even when quitting would have been rational. He'd suffered too much, invested too much, to walk away without one more attempt. The turning point came in 1977 to 1978, when director Yuen Wu-ping took a chance on Jackie for two films, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow and Drunken Master. These films were low-budget, almost experimental projects that allowed Jackie to try something completely different from the Bruce Lee imitations he'd been doing. Yuen Wu-ping understood that Jackie couldn't project intimidating power, but he could project vulnerability, humor, and creative problem-solving. The films made Jackie's character clumsy, scared, frequently losing fights before finding unconventional ways to win. They incorporated comedy into the action, showed Jackie taking painful falls and looking genuinely distressed, used his acrobatic skills for entertainment, rather than trying to make him look powerful. The films were massive commercial successes, changing Jackie's life literally overnight. Suddenly, he was in demand. Studios wanted him. Audiences responded to this new style of action comedy. The poverty and desperation of the previous years ended abruptly. Jackie went from scraping together money for noodles to being offered substantial pay for film roles, from sharing cramped apartments to being able to afford his own place, from uncertainty about next week's survival to planning his career months and years ahead. But the trauma of those early years never fully left him. Jackie's work ethic, the 18-hour days, the willingness to do dangerous stunts, the perfectionism that drives him to do dozens of takes until a sequence is exactly right, comes partly from talent and dedication, but also from the deep fear of returning to poverty and failure. He knows what it's like to have nothing, to fail publicly and repeatedly, to feel the industry give up on you. That knowledge drives him to work harder than necessary, to never turn down opportunities, to keep proving himself even after decades of success. Jackie's relationship with money is also shaped by those early years. Despite being worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he's known for being frugal, for negotiating hard on contracts, for maintaining tight control over his finances. This isn't greed, it's the survival instinct of someone who remembers what it's like to count coins for a bowl of noodles, who knows that security can disappear suddenly, that the entertainment industry is fickle and success is never guaranteed. The experience of repeated failure also made Jackie deeply empathetic toward his stunt team members. When he built the Jackie Chan stunt team in the 1980s, he structured it to provide financial security, salary rather than per-job payment, medical coverage, loyalty even when team members were injured and couldn't work. This generosity came from Jackie remembering what it was like to be an expendable stuntman, to know that injury meant unemployment, to have no safety net or support. He created for his team the security he desperately needed during his own struggling years. There's also a darker legacy from this period. Jackie's difficulty forming close personal relationships, his emotional distance from his own children, his tendency to prioritize work above everything else. These patterns were established during the years when survival required total focus on career and when relationships felt like luxuries he couldn't afford. He learned to be self-reliant because no one was coming to help him, learned that the only person he could truly depend on was himself, and that lesson stuck even after circumstances changed and he could have built different kinds of relationships. Looking back now from the perspective of Jackie's legendary career and enormous success, those years of poverty and failure seem like necessary preparation, the crucible that forged the determination and work ethic that made him special. But that's a comforting narrative that obscures how easily things could have gone differently. Jackie came very close to giving up several times. If he'd quit in 1976, if one more film had failed before Snake in the Eagle's Shadow came along, if director Yuen Wu-ping had chosen someone else for those crucial roles, Jackie's story would have ended as one more talented person who never got the right opportunity, who spent years struggling before accepting a smaller life. The randomness of success is uncomfortable to acknowledge. We prefer stories where talent and hard work inevitably lead to achievement, where persistence is always rewarded. Jackie's early years show a different reality. Many talented, hardworking people fail not because they lack ability, but because they never get the right opportunity at the right moment. Jackie was lucky that Yuen Wu-ping saw something in him and was willing to take a risk on a different approach. That luck mattered as much as Jackie's skills or persistence. What Jackie did with the opportunity once it came was the part he controlled. When Snake in the Eagle's Shadow succeeded, he could have played it safe, kept doing the same thing, avoided risks. Instead, he pushed harder, experimented more, took creative chances that could have easily failed. His next films were more ambitious, more dangerous, more personal. He wasn't content with modest success. He wanted to prove he could be great, wanted to create work that justified all the suffering and failure that had preceded the breakthrough. This drive to not just succeed, but to succeed so completely that failure could never touch him again, defined Jackie's career for the next 40 years. Every film had to be bigger, the stunts more dangerous, the action more creative. He worked himself to exhaustion, broke his body repeatedly, created sequences that terrified insurance companies and amazed audiences. And underlying all of it was the memory of sitting in that noodle shop in 1976, counting coins, wondering if this was as good as life would ever get. For people who only know Jackie as a successful global star, the story of his early poverty and repeated failures feels almost fictional, too dramatic to be real. But for Jackie, those years are more real than anything that came after. The success feels surreal, temporary, like it could vanish at any moment. The poverty and failure feel permanent, deeply true, the baseline reality that success is just a fortunate deviation from. That psychological legacy, the inability to fully believe in or trust success, is perhaps the most lasting effect of those early years. Jackie Chan became one of the most successful action stars in cinema history, but inside, part of him is still that 22-year-old in the noodle shop, counting his money, wondering how long he can keep trying before he has to give up and accept that he just isn't good enough.